Welcome to Crimson Legacy Historians, where the past is not just remembered, but brought back to life with depth and clarity. Imagine being 15 years old, dressed in heavy silk, believing you are being escorted to a wedding ceremony, and instead being led into a sealed chamber deep inside the imperial palace. The doors close behind you, not for privacy, for control. The women in the room are not guests. They are attendants, instructors, and witnesses. A court physician stands nearby, silent, waiting to record what happens next. You were told this was tradition. What no one mentioned was that every movement, every reaction, every flicker of fear would be remembered and judged. The months of enforced silence suddenly make sense. So does your mother's expression that morning, the way her hands lingered while fixing your hair, the way she avoided your eyes, not out of indifference, but because meeting them would have broken her. Because this ceremony is not about love. It is about obedience. This is not fiction. For more than 600 years, the Ottoman Empire maintained a system so careful, constructed, and so psychologically brutal that even its fiercest enemies would not have wished it upon their own children. A system spoken of only in whispers, and later erased entirely from official record. The year was the 633, and a 15-year-old princess was about to discover that imperial marriage had two faces. The public one, celebrations, music, blessings, and gold, and the private one, performed behind sealed doors, documented in silence, and remembered only by those it destroyed. What happened that night was not a private tragedy. It was the hidden cost of power, a cost every daughter of a sultan was expected to pay. When this story reaches the moment that unsettles you most, pause and tell me where you are watching from. No one should witness this alone. Now return with me to the empire itself. For over 6 centuries, from 1189 to 1992, the Ottoman Empire stretched like a shoreless ocean across 3 continents. Its armies thundered from the walls of Vienna to the deserts of Yemen. After the fall of Constantinople in 1253, the city was transformed into Istanbul, the beating heart of imperial power, and Topkapi Palace rose as its most dazzling symbol. Within those gilded walls, the fate of nations was decided, but in the shadows, the fate of souls was sealed. Hidden behind latticed windows and endless corridors, the Imperial Harem formed a parallel world, a sealed universe where more than 800 women lived at the height of its splendor. Every breath was observed, every gesture measured. Advancement and destruction often differed by a single misstep, by sometimes eternity. When the title of Haseki Sultan was bestowed upon Harem, the harem became more than a domestic space. It was a battlefield of alliances, ambition, and silent wars waged without swords. Concubines, most of them Christian captives taken from Europe or purchased in North African markets, entered the palace stripped of their past, but clinging to hope. Their days were filled with music, poetry, embroidery, and ritual obedience, all in service of a single fragile possibility: catching the sultan's attention. Ironically, many of these enslaved women possessed more paths to influence, and even freedom, than the daughters born at the very summit of power, because royal blood came with its own prison. During the period historian now called the Sultanate of Women, figures like Kösem Sultan and Turhan Hedi Sultan exercised astonishing influence, guiding councils, steering wars, and ruling from behind veils of protocol. Their authority reshaped the empire itself. But while these women wielded power, the princesses of the dynasty lived under a different fate entirely. They were not rulers, they were guarantees. Human clauses in diplomatic agreements, living seals on alliances, pawns placed to secure loyalty, suppress rebellion, or reward obedience among powerful men. And it was into this system that Princess Fatma Sultana was born in Fight 66. She was the daughter of Sultan Ahmed I and Kösem Sultan, a woman capable of ruling an empire from the shadows. Fatma grew up surrounded by gardens, scholars, and manuscripts written in Arabic and Persian. Chroniclers praised her intelligence. Tutors marveled at her discipline. She studied astronomy, calligraphy, history, and law. By all accounts, she was exceptional. She spoke 4 languages fluently. She debated learned men with confidence. She gazed at the night sky with a curiosity that unsettled her tutors, because curiosity was dangerous for a princess, and none of it mattered, because from the moment she was born, her life was never her own. Her destiny had already been written on invisible parchments. She would be married, not when she was ready, not if she wished it, but when the empire required it. Her body would serve diplomacy. Her obedience would seal alliances. The man chosen for her was Kara Mustafa Pasha, a commander hardened by years of war against Persia, nearly 20 years his senior. The union was not born of affection or even familiarity. It was forged through calculation. For him, marriage meant advancement, protection, and proximity to power. For her, still a teenager, it meant becoming a living instrument of state policy. A piece placed on the imperial chessboard. And 3 months before the wedding, the true ordeal began. The process was called Terbiya Mubarak, the so-called sacred education reserved exclusively for princesses. It had no equivalent anywhere else in the world. This was not instruction, it was conditioning. A system refined over centuries to strip royal daughters of pride and replace it with unquestioning obedience. The woman assigned to oversee it was Gulnar Hatun, 60 winters old, head of the harem and a veteran of more than a dozen such preparations. She had seen princesses break before. She knew exactly how long it took. Under her unyielding supervision, Fatma was led into the dais, the bride's chamber, a room lined with Persian carpets and dark ebony panels. Nothing inside was decorative. Every object carried meaning. Every angle reminded the girl of her purpose. From dawn until noon, day after day, Fatma was forced to rehearse rituals of reverence. 18 distinct forms of bowing. Each posture served a function. How to greet, how to serve, how to kneel, how to lie down, how to wait in silence for her husband's arrival. Even walking was no longer instinctive. She was drilled in measured steps, head lowered at precisely 30 degrees, hands never rising above the heart. Every movement erased the memory of who she had been. Every correction pushed her closer to the figure she was expected to become. But movement was only the beginning. Speech became the most merciless discipline of all. Fatma's vocabulary was reduced to just 43 approved words. Expressions of gratitude, apology, submission, and acceptance. Nothing else. Any attempt to speak freely, any deviation of tone, any question asked out of turn was punished. Fasting, isolation in cold, damp rooms. Public humiliation before the court. Her obedience was not assumed, it was tested. At regular intervals, Fatma was brought before a tribunal of women and eunuchs, presided over by her own mother, Kusum. There her compliance was evaluated as if it were currency, measured, weighed, and judged. And still, this was not the worst of it. Hidden beneath the palace and underground chambers few ever entered, preparations for the first night began. They were called Talim Vigurk. Exact replicas of bridal chambers had been constructed below ground. Inside them stood wax mannequins, anatomical figures commissioned from Venetian artisans and crafted with unsettling precision. Before stern instructors, Fatma was forced to rehearse gestures and acts no girl her age should ever have been made to understand. Every reaction was recorded in coded logs. Fear, tears, resistance. Each sign of distress condemned her to more sessions, more repetition, more conditioning. Slowly, methodically, the girl who once gazed at the stars was reduced to a compliant body. Her curiosity dismantled, her spirit disciplined into silence. She was no longer daughter of emperors. She was an apprentice to her fate. And the training did not stop there. Any sign of resistance, a lifted chin, a misplaced sigh, a defiant glance brought punishment. Prolonged fasting until weakness set in. Repetitive exercises designed to exhaust the body. Confinement in cold, airless cells. Often these humiliations were carried out before the entire female court. Not in private, not discreetly. Publicly, as if she were a disobedient servant rather than a princess of royal blood. Alongside physical control came mental purification. Fatma was forced to memorize verses drawn from Ottoman and Persian treatises on marital obedience. Passages from Nasihat al-Muluk and Ahlak Sinai filled her days. Texts of praise, submission, sacrifice, and the erasure of self as sacred virtues. She recited them aloud before concubines and eunuchs who acted as judges. The girl who once spoke of astronomy and poetry now repeated words designed to extinguish her will. Prayer, too, became a weapon. 5 times a day, at exact hours, Fatma was required to perform specially composed prayers written by the empire's ulama. These were not acts of personal faith. They were instruments of control. Prayers meant to dissolve individuality and redirect devotion entirely toward her future husband. And still the humiliations continued. Twice each week, before the entire female court, Fatma was required to serve her own father's favorite concubines. She washed them, combed their hair, fed them by hand, and dressed them for their nights with the sultan. This ritual was deliberate. It was designed to crush the final remnants of pride, to teach the princess that even those who shared her father's bed stood above her. Witnesses later noted that Fatma often broke down in silent sobs while fastening garments on those women, her hands trembling as the court looked on without a word. 1 week before the wedding, the regimen intensified. Fatma was moved to an isolated pavilion sealed from outside sound. Every detail of her existence was controlled. Her meals were regulated. Her baths were supervised daily using perfumed oils mixed with substances designed to calm, soften, and induce surrender. The walls of the pavilion were draped with tapestries depicting ideal wives. Obedient, fertile, silent. Venetian mirrors were placed throughout the rooms, forcing Fatma to observe herself constantly, as if her own reflection had become another form of surveillance. By then, she understood the truth. Her body no longer belonged to her. Her voice had been reduced to fragments. Even her thoughts were no longer safe, and the empire was not finished with her yet. In that isolation, a practice known as muraqabah was imposed. In its original form, it was a Sufi exercise of inward reflection meant to discipline the mind. Inside the palace, it had been transformed into something else entirely. A psychological weapon designed to force the princess to surveil herself, not only her actions, but her innermost thoughts. Even her inner world was no longer safe. Slowly, Fatma came to understand the full extent of what had been done to her. The curious, intelligent young girl who once dreamed of the heavens had been methodically erased. And then the day arrived. March 15, Saksaralitris. From the first light of dawn, Istanbul pulsed like an overflowing heart. Streets filled with incense and music. Processions wound through the city. Inside Topkapi Palace, banquets were laid on gold tableware and guests moved through halls alive with celebration. Dances from Persia and Andalusia. Songs performed by the empire's finest musicians. Janissaries competed before the Sultan, displaying strength and discipline. To the people, it looked like a festival worthy of heaven itself. For Fatma, it was a sentence being carried out. Chroniclers noted that while guests laughed and raised their cups, the princess remained silent. Her lips were dry, her gaze unfocused. Palace physicians watching her closely recorded tremors, cold sweats despite the March air and absence of appetite, and sudden episodes of breathlessness. Signs we would recognize today as severe anxiety. Public splendor met private terror. When the final toast was raised and civilian guests withdrew, the most dreaded moment began. Fatma was escorted from the palace halls toward the nuptial pavilion built deep within the private gardens according to ancestral plans dating back to the time of Mehmed II. The structure was octagonal, divided into 3 ascending levels. Each level served a purpose: purification, presentation, consummation. Nothing about this architecture was accidental. Every corridor, every threshold had been designed to strip the princess of agency and transform the ceremony into an act of total submission. The first level was the chamber of purification. There, Fatma was subjected to ritual baths lasting for hours. Essences of Damascus rose, sandalwood, and ambergris clung to her skin. Alchemists applied ointments infused with diluted opium and other substances meant to calm the body and dull resistance. Court doctors described the resulting state as an ecstasy of submission. The second level was the floor of surrender. Here, Fatma was dressed in her nuptial gown, white silk woven with gold thread and adorned with pearls from the Persian Gulf. To an outsider, it appeared regal. In truth, it was engineered for control. Hidden cords and internal fastenings restricted movement. The crown's weight limited her posture. Anklets and bracelets subtly constrained her steps. Thick-soled shoes made escape impossible. The garment was a prison disguised as splendor. While Fatma was being transformed into a symbol, her future husband underwent very different preparations. Surrounded by advisors and seasoned war veterans, Kara Mustafa Pasha received instruction not on marriage but on domination. Calculated phrases meant to humiliate. Techniques to impose authority over an imperial princess. There would be no uncertainty in this union. No resistance permitted, and came the ascent to the third level, the chamber of consummation. Its walls were covered with tapestries depicting conquered cities, defeated armies, and captive princesses. The imagery was deliberate. It drew a clear parallel between victory in war and victory in the marriage bed. It was there, surrounded by symbols of conquest, that Fatma faced her most feared night. Barely supported by her own breath, she became the living seal of a political pact. When the doors of that chamber closed behind the procession, Fatma was left alone with her husband. Medical records from the time describe what followed as a complete collapse of the spirit. Months of conditioning had exhausted her capacity to respond. Her body trembled uncontrollably. Her voice fell to a whisper. Her eyes drifted towards something no one else could see. Imperial doctors later named the condition total shock. Kara Mustafa Pasha, trained in sieges and battlefields, initially interpreted her state as defiance, as arrogance that needed to be broken. He applied the methods he had been taught. Intimidation, calculated dominance, but there was no rebellion to overcome, only emptiness. Fatma was no longer present. Her mind had retreated into deep dissociation, abandoning the body as a final means of survival. When the marriage was eventually consummated, hidden observers recorded the event as traumatic for all involved. Documents written in coded Persian speak of internal hemorrhages, repeated loss of consciousness, and what physicians called the departure of the soul. From that night onward, Fatma Sultan was never the same. In the days that followed, even the strictest instructors in the harem were alarmed. The princess developed selective mutism. She spoke only when directly addressed, and then only in whispers. Her appetite vanished entirely, forcing attendants to feed her against her will. The brilliant child who once debated scholars and studied the stars had disappeared. Episodes of uncontrollable crying began without warning and lasted for hours. The mere presence of a man, even trusted eunuchs, was enough to send the princess into visible panic. Rapid, shallow breathing, skin drenched in cold sweat, sudden fainting spells that left attendants scrambling to keep her conscious. Court physicians diagnosed what they called virginal melancholy. They spoke of it quietly, clinically, as if it were an expected consequence rather than a catastrophe. In modern understanding, we recognize it for precisely what it was: irreversible trauma, a wound to the psyche that no remedy could repair. They tried everything they knew: herbal treatments, music therapy, Sufi spiritual exercises meant to restore balance to the soul. None of it worked. Nothing brought back the girl Fatma had been. In her place remained a subdued, obedient presence, physically alive but absent. Her books stayed closed. Her instruments gathered dust. The gardens she once wandered with wonder were abandoned. The daughter of the most powerful sultan on earth had been reduced to a silent figure, a shadow of unrealized potential. Her marriage to Kara Mustafa Pasha became mechanical. There were children, there were formal appearances. There was the outward illusion of stability, but behind closed doors, silence ruled. Distance replaced intimacy. Routine replaced connection. According to later memoirs, the Pasha himself sought escape through military campaigns and opium, attempting to silence the guilt of having played his assigned role in a ritual that destroyed the woman he married. Fatma Sultan lived 29 more years after that night. She became an ornament at ceremonies, an obligated mother, a wife without a voice. Her death came in 1642, officially attributed to a brain fever. It occurred on the anniversary of her wedding. For many within the palace, this was no coincidence to them. It felt as though the weight of memory had finally closed around her soul. And Fatma's fate was not an anomaly. It was a pattern. Palace archives recovered centuries later reveal that dozens of Ottoman princesses endured similar destinies. Some were marked permanently by mutism. Others attempted escape through suicide or madness. Few vanished from official records altogether as if they had never existed. The imperial machine, so meticulous in its protocols, was equally skilled at erasing inconvenient lives. Euphemisms replaced truth. Silence replaced names. Recently translated documents speak of princesses who faked their own deaths to avoid a second marriage, of others who devised secret codes to communicate with sisters trapped in similar circumstances, and of a rare few who, with astonishing courage, petitioned the sultan directly for divorce, defying a system that appeared unbreakable. These stories, buried for centuries inside forbidden archives, reveal something crucial. Even in the deepest darkness, resistance never fully disappeared. The tragedy of Fatma Sultan, and of so many like her, exposes an uncomfortable truth. Absolute power does not always protect those closest to it. Sometimes it consumes them first. While the outside world imagined Ottoman princesses surrounded by luxury and privilege, the reality was an invisible chain engineered with precision, enforced through ritual, and justified in the name of empire. What we were taught to see as fairy tales were in truth political constructs that devoured the sultan's own daughters. And that leaves us with a question that does not let go. How many other secrets remain hidden inside palace archives across the world? What dark rituals were concealed within European courts, Russian dynasties, and Chinese imperial households? What price did women truly pay to uphold the greatness of empires? This has been Crimson Legacy Historians. If Fatma's story has stayed with you, subscribe and share it with those who deserve to know what history tried to bury. Leave a comment naming the queen or princess whose fate you want us to uncover next, because only by exposing these hidden truths can we finally hear the voices that power worked so hard to silence.